I remember that day as if it was burned into my mind, a day that should have been the happiest in my daughter's life. Instead, it changed the course of mine forever. My name is Walter Evans. I'm a retired machinist from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I always believed there was nothing I wouldn't do for my only daughter, Madison. The morning of Madison's wedding started cold and gray, even though it was supposed to be the first warm weekend in April. I sat in my old blue Chevy Malibu, parked among a sea of luxury vehicles outside Willow Creek Estate, a venue so fancy I had to double-check the address. Cadillacs, Teslas, even a Rolls-Royce glittered in the lot. My Malibu, with its squeaky brakes and coffee stains, felt like a lost child in a parade. In my jacket pocket, I kept an envelope so heavy it pulled down my chest. $23,000. My entire retirement savings, months of double shifts and skip dinners, all crammed into that single piece of paper. I'd scraped together every last cent to make this day possible for Madison. I told myself she'd remember this gesture for the rest of her life. That's what fathers do. Or at least, that's what I believed. As I watched other guests glide out of their luxury cars, dressed in tailored suits and sparkling dresses, I felt like an actor stumbling onto the wrong stage. The smell of expensive tulips floated on the breeze, mingling with the distant sound of a string quartet playing in the garden. My suit, pressed and borrowed from my brother-in-law, itched in the wrong places, but I told myself nobody would notice. Then I saw her. Madison, my baby girl, dressed in white lace and looking every bit the picture of a magazine bride. She was laughing, her head thrown back, surrounded by her soon-to-be in-laws, the Harrington family, from upstate. She was laughing, her head thrown back, surrounded by her soon-to-be in-laws, the Harrington family, from upstate New York. Her fiancé, Graham Harrington, stood beside her in a suit that probably cost more than my car. His parents, Charles and Vivian Harrington, looked the part of country club royalty, perfectly poised and polished, every gesture dripping with the kind of old money confidence that made regular folks like me feel invisible. I hesitated by the sidewalk, just out of sight, watching Madison beam up at Vivian as if she were already her daughter. I remembered when Maddie would run to me after school, arms outstretched, crying about scraped knees or bad test scores, looking at me like I was her whole world. Now, I was just a man footing the bill. Still, I squared my shoulders and made my way toward them. Before I could even greet her, Madison's smile flickered. "Oh, Dad, you're here. I wasn't sure you'd make it on time," she said, glancing at her phone as if to confirm something more important. I swallowed the sting. She turned immediately, looping her arm through Vivian's. "Mom, Charles, let's head in. The coordinator needs us." "Mom," she called Vivian. "Mom." My ex-wife, Dana, hadn't made it today, but the sound of Madison gifting that title to another woman in front of me felt like a punch to the gut. "Mr. Evans," Charles Harrington said, giving my hand a firm but cool shake. "Madison speaks so highly of you. Retirement treating you well?" I forced a polite smile. "It's a change, but I manage. Congratulations on gaining a daughter today." Vivian leaned in, voice as smooth as silk. "We feel so lucky. She fits right in with our family." The way she said our family, and the way Madison glowed at the compliment, told me everything I needed to know about my place in the new pecking order. Still, I followed behind them, more a bystander than a father. The guests streamed into the marble foyer, every inch decorated with lilies and gold-trimmed banners that spelled out, "Harrington Evans." I had paid for most of it. All I wanted was a single photo with my daughter. Inside, waiters offered sparkling cider and tiny pastries on silver trays. I declined, my hands too jittery to hold a glass. My heart hammered with hope as I caught Madison's eye. "Mads, can I have a moment before the ceremony?" She hesitated, glancing to Charles and Vivian, then nodded quickly. "Make it fast, Dad, the photographer's on a tight schedule." Her words stung, but I pressed on. I just wanted to say how proud your mother would be if she were here. And how proud I am, no matter what." My voice cracked, but she didn't notice, already glancing toward her new family. The wedding coordinator, a young man named Felix, hurried over. "Evan's family, this way please. We're starting the family portraits before the ceremony." My chest swelled. Finally, a moment to stand beside my daughter in a picture that would last long after the flowers wilted. We walked to the garden, where the sun had finally come out, illuminating the white gazebo and the green lawn beyond. Felix arranged everyone in careful groups. "Immediate family first," he said cheerfully, gesturing to Madison, Graham, Charles, and Vivian. I stepped forward, but Madison reached out with a quick, barely there touch on my arm. "Actually, Felix," she said quietly but firmly, "just the Harringtons for this one. Dad, could you wait by the fountain for a minute?" It took me a second to realize what was happening. In front of everyone, she was choosing her new family over the man who'd raised her. Felix looked uncertain. "Oh, sorry, Mr. Evans, maybe the next one?" I nodded, retreating to the fountain's edge, my hands shaking as I watched them pose for photo after photo, the perfect family, Madison centered between Charles and Vivian, all of them beaming for the camera. I felt more like the help than a father. Minutes passed, then more photos, more combinations, cousins, uncles, college friends. I was called in only for a large group shot, lost in a sea of faces, my daughter barely glancing at me. When it was over, Madison hurried over. "Thanks, Dad. The coordinator says we're done, so you can go ahead and find your table for the reception. I need to finish getting ready." I wanted to say something. To ask her why she was pushing me away, why she was letting these strangers fill the spaces I had worked my whole life to create for her. But the words stuck. I simply nodded and headed back inside, the envelope still weighing down my pocket, heavier than ever. My assigned seat was in a far corner, beside an old friend from the plant and a distant cousin I barely recognized. I tried to focus on the joy of the day, on the possibility that maybe this was just nerves or stress talking. Maybe later, at the dance, she'd pull me in for that father-daughter moment I dreamed about since she was a little girl. But as I watched Madison move through the crowd, laughing and glowing with her new in-laws, I realized the truth. She wasn't my little girl anymore. She'd built a new life, one that didn't have room for an old factory worker from Milwaukee, except, of course, when she needed someone to pay the bills. The band started to play, and the wedding reception roared to life with applause, clinking glasses, and the easy laughter of people who had always belonged. I sat in the corner, silent, my heart heavy, waiting for the moment when everything I'd done for my daughter would be recognized. But deep down, I knew that moment wasn't coming. The meal service began soon after, waiters gliding between tables with practiced efficiency. I barely touched the salmon fillet on my plate, picking at the asparagus while snippets of laughter and conversation washed over me like background static. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of Madison gliding through the room, radiant and busy, never looking my way. I listened to stories at my table, old Union jokes, tales of grandchildren, the kind of small talk that fills time at family gatherings. But I was only half there. My mind wandered back through the years. The scraped knees I'd bandaged, the late-night algebra homework I'd stumbled through, the overtime shifts I'd worked so Madison could go on class trips and never feel left out. In that moment, those sacrifices felt very far away, as if they'd been made by another man. A toast was called. Charles Harrington rose first, glass in hand, delivering a speech about family values, and the future Madison and Graham would build together. Every word was polished, confident, a performance for the ages. He called Madison a true Harrington now, and the crowd applauded as though she'd just been knighted. Vivian followed with her own speech, full of warmth and just the right amount of affection. She reminisced about meeting Madison for the first time at a charity event, describing her as bright, eager, and already part of our family from that very first handshake. I waited, praying for even a passing mention of her own father. None came. Finally, Graham stood. To my beautiful wife, Madison, who has made me the luckiest man in the world. To my parents, who made this day possible. And to all of you, our family, for making today unforgettable. He raised his glass. Madison beamed at him, her eyes shining. To family, she echoed. Not once did her eyes find mine. After the applause died down, the band launched into a waltz, and the dance floor filled with couples. I sat at my table, my foot tapping with nervous energy, waiting for the traditional father-daughter dance, the one moment I told myself would be mine, no matter how the rest of the day went. I watched Madison and Graham spin around the dance floor in their own world, the lights sparkling off her dress. A hush settled as the band leader called for the father of the bride. My heart leapt. I stood, smoothing my jacket, and took a step forward. But as I reached the edge of the floor, Madison intercepted me with a smile so bright and brittle it nearly shattered me. "Oh, Dad," she said quickly, voice lowered. "Graham's Uncle Rick is going to do the father-daughter dance. It's sort of an inside family joke. I hope you don't mind, everyone's expecting it. You understand, right?" She squeezed my hand, her eyes darting past me. I tried to keep my face calm, nodding as she slipped away. I watched as Rick, a burly man with too much cologne and a boisterous laugh, took my daughter's hand and spun her around the dance floor to applause and cheers. The song was, "What a Wonderful World." Madison laughed, Rick dipped her, and the crowd ate it up. Inside, something in me cracked. I had told myself I'd be fine with anything. But this was different. This was being erased in front of a room full of strangers, most of whom I'd paid to feed and entertain. I sat back down, forcing my breath to slow. The envelope in my pocket, the $23,000 I'd planned to transfer tomorrow morning, felt like a burning coal pressed against my chest. Every detail of the reception, from the gold-rimmed plates to the 10-piece jazz band, was a line item I'd sacrificed for. The bill was more than money. It was time, sweat, missed birthdays, and all the little joys I'd passed up to give Madison the world. Across the room, Madison and Graham danced, oblivious to the pain rippling through me. My cousin Bobby, noticing my face, nudged my elbow. "You all right, Walt? You look a million miles away." I managed a thin smile. "Just taking it all in, Bobby." He nodded. "She sure made it, huh? I remember when you used to bring her to Little League in that old pickup. You did good, Walt." I nodded, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Then, the microphone crackled to life. Vivian stepped up again, this time inviting Madison and Graham to the front of the room for a family presentation. She called Charles and herself, then several cousins and friends, one by one, all Harringtons. They surrounded Madison and Graham, holding up a quilt made from family heirloom fabrics, a tradition, Vivian said, that symbolized the strength and continuity of the Harrington line. I realized, in that moment, what I had become, an outsider at my own daughter's wedding, a footnote in the story of her new life. No quilt square for Walter Evans, no place in the new family tree. Just a seat in the corner, and an empty dance card. I stood quietly, watching as they posed for more photos. The photographer, a young woman with a sharp eye, caught my gaze and quickly turned away. It was as if I was invisible, a shadow in a room built from my own sacrifices. The evening wore on. I finished my wine in 2 long gulps and glanced at the clock. The envelope in my pocket had grown heavier by the hour. I felt, for the first time in decades, that I was truly and completely alone. But even as I sat there, I could feel something changing deep inside. Maybe it was the pain of loss, or maybe it was a flicker of dignity. I wasn't sure what I'd do next, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't be the man who funded his own disappearance. After the family presentation wrapped up, the evening blurred into a parade of well-practiced routines: cake cutting, bouquet toss, another round of toasts. I watched from my table, a silent observer. Occasionally, someone would stop by with a handshake or a pat on the back. "Beautiful wedding, Walt. You must be proud." I'd nod, thank them, and return to my glass of flat champagne. The real Harrington celebration was happening at the head table, where laughter was louder, smiles brighter, and every joke seemed to include Madison as the new centerpiece of their world. She was radiant, basking in their warmth. I tried to remind myself that this is what I'd wanted for her: a big life, a happy future, more than I could ever give. But it's hard to celebrate when you're standing on the outside of your own family. At one point, I slipped out to the veranda for some air. The night was cool and clear, stars winking above the twinkling lights of the city. I leaned against the railing, phone in hand, and scrolled aimlessly through old pictures. Madison at age 5 in her Halloween witch costume, Madison at 12 winning the spelling bee, Madison in her high school graduation cap, hugging me for dear life. My chest tightened with longing for those simpler days, when being her dad meant everything. Suddenly, my phone buzzed, a message from my old friend Joe, who couldn't make the wedding because of his back surgery. "How's the big day going, Walt? Don't let Em walk all over you. Kids forget, but a good dad never does." I stared at the screen for a while. Then I texted back. "You were right, Joe. I should have kept a little more for myself. Hope you're healing up." When I returned to the ballroom, the mood had shifted. It was time for gifts and special acknowledgments. Charles took the microphone. "Before we wrap up this wonderful celebration, I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to making this day perfect. My wife Vivian, for her tireless work, our extended family and friends, and of course Madison's father, Walter Evans, who gave so generously." All eyes turned to me, and there was a polite smattering of applause. Madison smiled graciously, but her eyes slid over me quickly, as if we both knew this acknowledgement was just for show. Charles continued, "And now, as tradition demands, we present a special gift to the happy couple, a down payment on their first home." He gestured, and a servant brought out a large, ribbon-wrapped box. Madison gasped, and Graham grinned, tearing open the package to reveal a set of house keys atop a stack of envelopes. Charles explained, "A little Harrington family tradition, a good start, and a home of their own." More applause, more hugs, more photos. I clapped along with the rest, but in my head, I was doing the math. I knew those envelopes contained thousands, maybe tens of thousands, enough to launch their new life. No one asked if the Evans family had contributed. No one mentioned that the catering, the band, the very flowers on the tables had come from my retirement savings. I was the invisible engine making everything run, never invited to ride in the front seat. A few guests started to leave. At my table, the cousin from Madison's mother's side leaned in and muttered, "Tough night, huh, Walt? I thought there'd be more for you." "She's changed." I just nodded, unable to put my feelings into words. Suddenly, the wedding coordinator, Felix, approached with a clipboard. "Mr. Evans, just a reminder, the venue balance will be processed at 8 a.m. tomorrow. It's all in the contract, but if you need to make any adjustments, you can call my office before then." I blinked, startled. "The full amount?" "Yes, sir. Your check will cover the venue, catering, flowers, entertainment, everything except the photographer, which was paid in advance by the Harringtons. If you have any questions, my card is inside the folder." He slipped a packet into my hand, then hurried away to corral the musicians. I stared down at the contract. $23,000. I'd been telling myself for months it was worth it, that a father's job was to make sure his daughter's wedding was the happiest day of her life. But as I watched Madison twirl in her new family's embrace, it all felt like payment for a ticket to my own disappearance. That's when the idea started to take root, a quiet, stubborn thought I couldn't ignore. The money hadn't transferred yet. My check was post-dated, the bank alert set for the morning. What if I didn't pay? What if I finally did something for myself? But another voice, my late wife Dana's, whispered in my head. Don't embarrass her. Don't make a scene. She's still your daughter. I stood, torn between my pride and my loyalty, two instincts that had always pulled me in opposite directions. Then, as the night wound down, Madison finally approached me, almost as an afterthought. She pressed a brief hug against my shoulder. Thanks for everything, Dad. It's all perfect. I know you did your best. We're going to take a quick drive with the Harringtons. See you before we leave for the honeymoon? I nodded, too tired to argue. She vanished into the swirl of well-wishers and flashbulbs, her white dress trailing behind her like a flag for a new country I'd never be allowed to visit. I sat down at the empty table, the weight of the day settling on me. The envelope felt like an anchor. My heart pounded with uncertainty. I knew, in that moment, that tomorrow's decision would change everything. The party faded, the guests departed, and soon the only sounds left were the clinking of glassware and the hushed voices of staff clearing tables. I lingered, unable to leave, staring at the centerpiece of white roses, bought with money I'd saved for a different kind of future. Felix gave me a polite nod as he directed workers to pack up the linens. In that cavernous hall, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. I wandered outside, into the parking lot where the last of the luxury SUVs were being loaded. I leaned against my battered Chevy Malibu, staring up at the endless Wisconsin sky. I tried to remember what hope felt like. For a while, I just stood there, replaying every moment of the day in my mind. Every detail was sharp: the look on Madison's face as she introduced me to the Harringtons, her bright laughter with Vivian, the warmth she gave them so easily, the practiced distance she kept from me. I wondered where I had gone wrong. Was it when Dana passed away and I stopped being fun? Was it all the nights I came home too tired to talk? Or had it just been easier for her to drift away than to stay tied to a life she wanted to forget? I pulled out my phone again. The wedding photographer had posted the first set of photos to a group chat. Image after image scrolled by, Madison grinning between Charles and Vivian, Graham dipping her in a dramatic dance, the Harrington family gathered in front of the estate. I searched for myself, but in every frame, I was in the background, blurry, off to the side, or missing entirely. Beneath the photos, people were commenting. Stunning bride! What a beautiful family! So much love in every picture! No one noticed the tired old man in the borrowed suit. Back in my car, I rested my head on the steering wheel, feeling utterly drained. I didn't cry. I was too old for that, or maybe just out of practice. Instead, I felt a cold numbness settle in my chest, a kind of resignation. This was my reward for years of hard work, a single night of invisibility, paid for in full. But even in my exhaustion, I couldn't ignore the voice in my head, my own, but sharper. You're not just a wallet. You're her father. And you deserve more than this. I opened the contract folder, rereading the terms. The check wouldn't process until 8 a.m. If I called the bank first thing, I could stop the transfer. It would be chaos for the vendors, maybe even a disaster. But suddenly, I wondered why their comfort mattered more than my dignity. I remembered the stories my own father told me, back in the old neighborhood. A man's got to know his worth, Walt. Or no one else will. Maybe I'd spent too long forgetting mine. As I sat there, Madison's voice from childhood echoed in my ears. Daddy, promise you'll always be there. I had been. Every school play, every Christmas, every heartbreak. I'd been there with a lunchbox in the mornings and a light on at night. I'd spent years making sure she never had to want for anything, even if it meant I did. Tonight, though, she hadn't even looked back to see if I was still in the room. That's when the loneliness turned to something else, a steely determination. I pulled out the envelope, holding the check to the dome light. $23,000. Enough to fix the roof, travel for once in my life, maybe even take up fishing again the way I dreamed. Why should that money pay for the happiness of people who barely saw me? Why should I fund the erasure of my own existence? I knew what tomorrow would bring if I didn't act. The phone calls, the panic from Felix and the vendors. Maybe even a furious message from Madison. But if this was the price of finally being seen, not as a piggy bank, but as a man, maybe it was worth it. Suddenly, I wasn't tired anymore. I took a breath of cool night air, clearer than any I'd had all day. I slipped the check from its envelope and, with hands that only shook a little, tore it in half. Then in quarters. Then, slowly and methodically, into tiny scraps I let fall to the passenger seat. A strange calm came over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't spiteful. I simply felt free. I'd done my part, a lifetime's worth. The rest was up to Madison now. If she wanted her new family to support her, she could ask them. I started the engine and drove home through the empty streets of Milwaukee, the city lights twinkling like far-off promises. My house was waiting, small, a little shabby, but all mine. I let myself in and set the contract folder down on the kitchen table, next to the framed photo of Madison as a child. For the first time in a long time, I looked at that photo and smiled. I poured myself a glass of water, sat in my favorite chair, and listened to the quiet. It sounded a lot like peace. Tomorrow, the world would be different. For the first time, maybe, I was okay with that. The morning sun crept through my kitchen window, spilling gold across the table. I woke earlier than usual, an unfamiliar lightness in my chest. For the first time in months, there was no weight dragging me down, no dread about the balance in my account, no feeling of being trapped in someone else's dream. I poured myself a cup of black coffee, sat at the table, and opened the newspaper, as if it were any ordinary Saturday. But even before I reached the comics, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I knew who it was before I answered. "Mr. Evans, this is Felix from Willow Creek Estate. We're calling regarding the wedding payment. There seems to be an issue, your check hasn't cleared. Would you be able to come by or call the bank? We're sure it's just a mix-up." I almost laughed. For years, I dropped everything to fix other people's problems. I'd have rushed across town to smooth things over, to keep Madison from being embarrassed, to save the day with another sacrifice. But now, as I sipped my coffee, I felt only a strange sense of relief. "I'm afraid there's no mix-up, Felix," I said calmly. "I've decided not to pay. I hope you can work things out with the other parties." There was a long silence, then a stammer. "Mr. Evans, this is highly irregular. Your daughter—" I cut him off. "My daughter made it clear yesterday that she has a new family. Maybe they can help." I hung up before he could say more, set the phone aside, and finished my coffee. The world didn't end. My house didn't collapse. I wasn't struck by lightning for finally choosing myself. Later that morning, as I tended the small patch of tomatoes in my backyard, my phone rang again. This time it was Madison. "Dad! What's going on?" Her voice was sharp, panicked. "Felix says you canceled the check? They can't process any of the payments. The caterer is threatening to call the police." I listened to her rant for a full minute before answering. "Madison, yesterday you made your choice. You told the world I'm not your family. You replaced me in every photo, every dance, every speech. But when you needed something, suddenly I'm your father again?" She was silent, and for a moment I heard the little girl she used to be, lost, uncertain, wanting me to fix everything. But I couldn't go back. Not this time. "Dad, please," she said, her voice cracking. "Everyone's looking at me. The Harringtons won't cover the bill. They say it's not their responsibility. I can't believe you'd do this on my wedding weekend. Maybe this is the lesson you need, Maddie. Family isn't just for when it's convenient. If you want my help, you treat me like a father every day, not just when there's a check to write. But the vendors. I'm sorry, Madison. You'll figure it out. You're strong. You've got a whole new family to back you up now. She sobbed. It broke my heart, but I stayed silent. When she finally hung up, I set the phone on the windowsill and went back to my garden. The rest of the day passed quietly. I read, walked the neighborhood, caught up on repairs I'd neglected. Every hour that ticked by made my decision feel more right. I had given everything, time, money, heart. I didn't owe my dignity, too. That evening, as the sun slipped low, there was a knock at my door. I half expected it to be Madison, or even Graham and his parents, but it was my cousin Bobby, holding 2 cups of coffee and a sympathetic grin. Heard about the fireworks at Willow Creek, he said, handing me a cup. Whole place is in an uproar. Some say you're a hero, some say you've lost your mind. Me? I think it's about damn time someone stood up for the little guy. We sat on the porch, listening to the crickets. For the first time in ages, I felt seen, not as a source of money or as a tragic figure, but as a man with a backbone. You know what the best part is? Bobby asked. You'll wake up tomorrow with your savings and your self-respect. Can't buy that in any wedding catalog. I laughed. It felt good, honest. The air was cool, the sky purple and blue. I realized then that I hadn't just saved my money, I'd saved my soul. As night settled in, I felt the ache of loss, but it was cleaner than before. Less about being forgotten, more about letting go. I didn't know if Madison would ever forgive me. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe this was the cost of breaking free. But I could look in the mirror and know I'd done the right thing. For the first time in my life, I was done apologizing for being myself. Tomorrow, I would wake up and start living for me. By Sunday, news of the Evans wedding debacle had made its way through every circle in town. My phone buzzed with messages, some scolding, some supportive, a few just curious. I ignored most of them, though a couple of old friends called to say, I wish I'd had the guts to do the same, Walt. By noon, the story was already being rewritten. Some said I'd ruined my daughter's big day out of spite. Others whispered I'd been driven to it by years of disrespect. In the end, I knew it didn't matter. Truth, like love, is often invisible in a room full of strangers. It was Madison's silence that hurt the most. She didn't call again that day. For years, I dropped everything to answer her smallest request. Now, the phone sat quiet on my kitchen table while the afternoon sun crept across the linoleum. I tried to fill my day with purpose, sweeping the porch, mending a broken shutter, sorting through boxes in the attic. As I worked, my mind replayed scenes from the wedding. I could still see Madison's face when she realized her new family wouldn't save her. I remembered the tremble in her voice, the way she reached out to me in panic, not love. Part of me ached to fix it. But the deeper, quieter part, the one that had kept silent for too long, held me steady. I had made a stand not just for myself, but for every quiet, forgotten parent who had been written out of their own child's story. That evening, I called Joe, my friend recovering from surgery. He picked up on the first ring. Walt, you made the news. He cackled, coughing a little. Everyone at the VFW's talking about you. Even Marlene says you're a legend now. I managed a laugh. Yeah, a broke legend. Madison might never speak to me again. Maybe, Joe said. Or maybe she'll finally understand what respect costs. Sometimes the only way people learn is the hard way. We talked for an hour, mostly about old times. By the end of the call, my spirits had lifted. There was life after fatherhood, I realized. There was a world outside the role of provider. The next morning, I sat on my porch sipping coffee when a car pulled up to the curb. For a moment, I thought Madison had come, but it was Vivian Harrington. She stepped out in her impeccable navy pantsuit, her posture ramrod straight. She walked up the path, heels clicking sharply. Mr. Evans, she began, her voice cool. I thought we should speak privately. I invited her in, offered coffee. She declined. I hope you understand, Vivian said, that your actions have put Madison and Graham in a very difficult position. There's a great deal of embarrassment, not to mention financial stress. I nodded but kept my expression neutral. She continued, while I sympathize with your feelings, I do think you could have handled things differently. We would have appreciated more warning. I smiled gently, tired of explanations. Mrs. Harrington, I spent years giving warnings. They just weren't heard. Vivian frowned, sensing the futility of pressing further. Very well. I suppose, in the end, every family has their moments. Madison will find her way through this. And you, well, perhaps you'll find some peace. She stood to leave, then paused. You know, sometimes it takes a crisis for people to see what's truly important. When she was gone, I sat for a long while, reflecting on her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe this rupture would force Madison to re-examine the path she was on. Or maybe we would drift further apart. I couldn't control her choices any more than I could force the rain to fall. I spent the afternoon at the lake, a place I'd neglected for too long. The air was clean and cool, the water sparkling under the open sky. I cast a line, not expecting to catch anything, just enjoying the slow, steady rhythm of being alone. The worries and regrets ebbed away, replaced by a growing sense of possibility. On the way home, I stopped at the grocery store. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, smiled as he rang up my bread and milk. Heard about the wedding, he said quietly. You did the right thing, sir. My dad always says, don't let people treat you like a doormat. Not even your kids. I chuckled. Smart man, your dad. As night fell, I returned to my house, my sanctuary. I realized that peace, true peace, doesn't come from being needed or wanted. It comes from knowing your own value, from standing your ground even when the world expects you to bend. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat in my old armchair, and for the first time in years, allowed myself to dream of new adventures, of days spent fishing, of road trips out west, of maybe even finding love again. My life, I realized, wasn't over. It was just beginning. And as I drifted to sleep, the weight in my chest finally lifted, replaced by a quiet hope for whatever tomorrow might bring. The next week passed in a strange, peaceful quiet. Without the constant demands of wedding planning or the fear of being needed only as a bank account, my days felt open and unfamiliar. I made simple meals, kept the house tidy, and finally started that old woodworking project in the garage, a rocking chair I'd always promised myself I'd build. Someday. The phone rang a few more times. Most were vendors, politely inquiring or gently reminding me about the outstanding bills. Some, I knew, were hoping I'd cave and send a check after all. But my resolve held. I explained, calmly and honestly, that my part in the wedding had ended the moment I was told, by my own daughter, that I was no longer family. Most accepted it. Some tried to guilt me. But I refused to be drawn back into the old script. Each evening, I walked around the neighborhood, greeting familiar faces. I realized how much of my life I'd missed: quiet sunsets, the chatter of children playing, the changing colors of the leaves, because I'd always been hurrying toward the next obligation. Now I took my time, breathing in the slow, healing air of freedom. It wasn't until Friday afternoon that Madison finally called again. Her voice was small, shaky, and unfamiliar. Dad, can we talk? I braced myself, expecting anger, accusations, or another desperate plea for money. But what came instead surprised me. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. I got swept up in all of it, the Harringtons, the planning, the pressure to fit in. I thought I had to choose, that I could build a perfect life if I just let myself forget who I was. But I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated you that way. I shouldn't have said you weren't family. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The years of sacrifice, the pain of being pushed aside, all tangled together in my chest. I wanted to tell her that apologies couldn't fix everything, that trust, once broken, takes time to mend. But I also heard the little girl in her voice, the one who once clung to my hand at the county fair, who believed her dad could fix anything. "I'm not perfect either, Maddie," I said quietly. "Maybe I tried too hard to give you everything and forgot to ask for respect in return. Maybe I let you forget where you came from, and who always had your back. But I'm still here. I always will be, if you want me in your life for the right reasons." She sniffled on the other end. "I do, Dad. I want to fix things. I don't know how, but I want to try." We talked for a long time, about the wedding, about Graham, about her fears that she'd disappointed everyone. I listened more than I spoke. For the first time in years, it felt like a real conversation, not a negotiation. She didn't ask for money. She just asked for a chance. In the weeks that followed, Madison called often. Sometimes she came by for coffee, sometimes she just wanted advice about life or marriage. There was no talk of checks or emergencies. She even helped me finish the rocking chair, laughing as she sanded the arms smooth. We were both clumsy with apologies, but slowly, the wall between us began to crumble. As for the Harringtons, they kept their distance. Graham and Madison eventually settled their wedding debts, slowly, with some embarrassment and a few hard lessons. It was not the fairy tale ending the magazines had promised, but it was real. They learned to budget, to apologize, and to stand on their own feet. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I'd sit on my porch in that new rocking chair, listening to the sounds of life drifting through the neighborhood. The old ache would stir, but it no longer hurt like it once did. Instead, I felt something different, a sense of having reclaimed my own worth. I realized, finally, that love isn't about paying for acceptance. It's not about sacrificing everything to be needed or keeping silent so others can be comfortable. Love, I'd learned, is about honesty, boundaries, and the courage to demand respect, even from your own family. Madison and I never did go back to what we were when she was little. Too much had changed. But we built something new, slower, more honest, with room for mistakes and forgiveness. In the end, I didn't lose my daughter. I found myself. And in doing so, I gave us both the gift of real family, not bought, not demanded, but earned, one conversation at a time. So if you're reading this, or hearing my story, let me offer you a bit of advice from an old man who's seen a few things. Don't wait for a crisis to stand up for yourself. Don't confuse love with endless sacrifice. And never, ever forget your own worth, because when you finally claim it, the people who matter will meet you there. I leaned back in my chair as the sun set behind the houses, grateful for the peace that comes from letting go, and for the daughter, imperfect but loved, who'd finally come home.